Pretend you're our father, just for 20 minutes. The whisper came so close to his ear that Alexander Hale felt the words before he understood them. He did not flinch. He set his teaspoon down against the saucer instead, carefully, the way a man sets down anything he is afraid of dropping, and looked up. 4 faces. Identical. Solemn. The tea room at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel kept its own kind of quiet that late afternoon. A hush laid over the high ceilings like a good wool blanket, even while Seneca Street rattled with buses just beyond the windows. Alexander had chosen the corner table on purpose, the one near the glass, because the light there was good for sketching, and because nobody ever bothered a man alone with a sketchbook. His tea, Earl Grey, always Earl Grey, still lifted a thin curl of steam. Beside the cup sat his open notebook, half a public playground drawn in soft pencil, the ink from an earlier line not yet dry. He was 36 years old, and he had learned in the hardest year of his life that the world runs quieter than people think. Grief does that. It turns the volume down on everything except the small sounds: a spoon against china, a child's shoe on marble floor, a watch ticking on your own wrist. That watch, his late wife's gift, the leather gone soft with 5 years of wear, ticked now steady as ever while he waited for his son's message to load. Liam, 8 years old, 45 minutes into afternoon class, the text had said 10 minutes earlier. "I'm okay, Dad. 45 minutes left." Alexander had smiled at that. The boy always signed off like a soldier reporting in, and gone back to his drawing. He never saw the girls arrive. That was the thing he would tell people later when they asked, and there would be many people asking. They didn't walk up so much as appear. The way weather changes, you don't see the first drop of rain, only that suddenly you are standing in it. 4 girls 7 years old by the look of them, dressed alike in pale cotton, hair pulled back in matching ribbons of different colors, blue, pink, green, yellow, and faces so alike that for one dizzy second, Alexander wondered if his eyes were playing tricks. The one with a small mole beneath her right eye stepped closest. Her gaze did not waver, did not blink, did not carry a single trace of a 7-year-old's mischief. It was Alexander, thought later, the most serious set of eyes he had ever seen on a child, and he had raised one. She was 7 years old and already fluent in the particular exhaustion of being the oldest by 4 minutes, the one her sisters looked to first, the one who had learned to read a room the way other children learned to read picture books. What she wanted in that moment wasn't rescue. It was one honest adult, just for 20 minutes, who wasn't performing for a camera or a boardroom. She had chosen Alexander because he was the only still thing in the room, a man who wasn't checking his phone, wasn't watching the door, wasn't already halfway into someone else's agenda. "Please," she said again, low and fast, "pretend you're our father, just for 20 minutes. He had no time to answer. The girl with the crooked, lopsided smile tugged his sleeve and murmured barely louder than breath, "He's coming." The glass doors at the far end of the tea room swung open. A man in a gray suit tailored to the millimeter walked in, and his eyes moved across the room the way a man's eyes move when he is hunting, not looking. Then the girl with the mole did something Alexander would replay in his mind for weeks afterward. She pulled out the chair beside him, sat down, wrapped both small hands around his forearm, and said, loudly, clearly pitched exactly to carry to the next table, "Daddy, can we order the chocolate cake?" Alexander froze. Not from fear. From shock so sudden it felt physical, like missing a stare in the dark. The other 3 girls slid into chairs around the table in the same instant, a small fortress of matching ribbons closing in around him, and somewhere behind his ribs, Alexander felt his heart do something it had not done in 5 years, lurch hard toward a stranger's child. The man in gray reached the table. His smile arrived a half-second before his eyes did, which told Alexander everything he needed to know about the smile. "Girls," he said pleasantly as a radio announcer, "your mother's waiting in the car. Time to go." Alexander looked at 4 small faces, then at the man who had not once looked at the girls while speaking to them. He did not move. "I've never met these children before today," he said low, and even the voice he used to use on construction sites when a beam wasn't sitting right, and everyone needed to hear him the first time. And I'm not handing over a child to a stranger because he told me to. The man's jaw tightened just enough to notice. He reached for his phone, thumb already finding a number. That was when the girl with the mole leaned in again, so close and so fast that only Alexander caught the words. "If you let him take us," she whispered. "Mommy has to smile for the pictures. She hates smiling when she's scared." Something in Alexander's chest went very still and very clear, the way it used to go still and clear on a job site the second before he made a call that mattered. He set down his teacup. He looked past the man in gray to the young server hovering uncertainly by the pastry case, and he raised his voice just enough to be heard 3 tables over. "Please call security. And get in touch with these children's legal guardian, right now." The porch swing back home, he would think much later, had creaked the exact same way every single evening of his marriage, steady, patient, unbothered by whatever storm was blowing through the yard. He wished in that frozen moment in the tea room that life worked the same way. It did not. Not yet. Because pinned beneath his elbow, half hidden under the saucer, was the local newspaper he'd been skimming before the girls arrived, folded to a headline about tomorrow's shareholder meeting at Langford Family Resorts. He hadn't connected it to anything. Not yet. What Alexander didn't know yet was that the girl beside him had already decided something about him, and that decision was about to turn his whole quiet life inside out. Hotel security reached the table in under a minute. The Fairmont trained its staff well, and a scene involving 4 unaccompanied children moved fast up every priority list. Right behind them came the girl's nanny, pale and breathless, insisting she'd only stepped away to the ladies' room down the hall, 90 seconds, no more. She hadn't let the girls out of her sight in 3 years without a plan in place. It would take Alexander weeks to realize the uncomfortable truth of it, that Patrick hadn't stumbled onto that 90-second gap by luck. He'd known her break routine well enough to set his watch by it. The man in gray did not run. He simply smiled wider, which was somehow worse, and produced a business card from his breast pocket with the unhurried calm of someone who has never once been told no and meant it. "Patrick Crow," he said, sliding the card across the white tablecloth like a winning hand at poker. "Board member, Langford Family Resorts. I've been authorized to escort the children home." Alexander did not touch the card. "I need to hear that from their mother," he said, "not from a piece of paper." Something flickered behind Patrick's eyes, not anger, not yet. Calculation. The look of a man recounting his cards. While they waited, the quietest of the 4 girls, the one who tilted her head when she listened, as though the world made more sense sideways, pressed something into Alexander's lap without a word. A scrap of paper, folded small, soft, with sweat from a nervous fist. Pencil letters hurried. "He wants the pictures for the merger. Mommy said no." Alexander's stomach turned over. He was starting to understand this was never about a stranger's kindness. It was about something much bigger, and it had already caught him in its current. He did not have long to sit with it. Less than 10 minutes later, the glass doors opened again, and this time the whole room seemed to feel it before it saw it. Margaux Langford walked in like weather arriving, 4 assistants trailing a half-step behind, navy blazer, sharp as a blade, hair pulled back so tight it looked like it might hurt. Her eyes found her daughter's in a single sweep of the room, the way a mother's eyes always do, no matter how many boardrooms she has sat in that day. "I don't recall asking anyone to babysit," she said. Her voice could have cut glass. The girl with the mole stood up before anyone else could speak. She kept her small hand wrapped around Alexander's arm, and she said it clearly, deliberately, loud enough for every ear in the tea room, including her mother's. "This is Daddy for 20 minutes. He said we could stay." Margot's face did something Alexander had only seen once before in his life. On his own face, in a hospital mirror the year everything fell apart. It was the look of a person absorbing a blow they hadn't braced for. She turned to him. "Who are you?" Alexander rose. He had a foot of height on her, and he used none of it to intimidate, only to be seen clearly. "I'm the man your daughters asked to sit with them," he said. "And I'm not leaving until I know they're safe." That was when Margaux saw Patrick standing near the pastry case, still smiling his half-smile, and something crossed her face that was not simple anger. It was recognition. The particular sinking recognition of watching a chess move land exactly as your opponent intended. Patrick stepped forward, voice smooth as poured cream. "Margaux, the girls only need a few photographs with me before tomorrow's event. Perfectly simple. Very good for the numbers." She did not answer him. She looked at her daughters one by one and then back at Alexander. "Thank you," she said, "for not handing them over. I'll take it from here." Alexander nodded and reached for his sketchbook, ready to disappear the way he'd learned to disappear quietly without needing thanks. But someone wasn't ready to let him go quite yet. The girl who chewed her lower lip when she worried caught up to him at the door and slipped something into his hand before darting back to her sisters. An old business card of her mother's, the printed office number scratched through in ink, a private cell number written beneath it in a child's careful hand. He didn't understand yet what any of it would cost him. By the time Alexander got home that evening, a photograph had already found its way onto the internet, snapped by a stranger 2 tables over. At the exact moment the girl with the mole had laughed, sugar spilled across the white cloth. "Mystery father spotted with Langford quadruplets at Fairmont Olympic," one caption read. Within 2 hours it carried its own hashtags, Langford heiresses, who is the father, and by the next morning it had crawled its way onto 3 different Seattle news sites, the way things do now, faster than anyone can stop them, faster than anyone can even understand what's happening. The Langford board noticed by 9 a.m., Patrick made sure of it, raising the matter in a closed-door session with the particular gentleness of a man twisting a knife slowly enough that it looks like concern. "Our CEO appears to be concealing something in her private life," he said. "Are we confident she's clear-headed enough to guide this company through the largest deal of the decade?" Margaux had no choice but to issue a public statement that Alexander Hale was simply a kind stranger who had helped her children for a few minutes, nothing more. It did not put the fire out. Statements rarely do once a fire has caught. And 2 days later her phone call would pull Alexander back in, this time for good. Her call came from the private number written on the back of that scratched-out card. She asked to meet him again, same corner table, same tea room, to thank you properly and to clear things up. When they sat down across from one another the second time, Alexander opened his sketchbook without thinking, the way he always did while he waited for words to come. Margaux went still. She was looking at a design for a children's play plaza, soft curves, low walls built for small hands, shade trees marked in careful pencil, and she recognized it instantly, because she had rejected this very design herself 5 years earlier for a Langford resort outside Bend, Oregon. Not upscale enough, the memo had said. She remembered the name of the man who designed it, though she had never once put a face to it until this moment. Alexander Hale. She looked at him a long moment longer than politeness required, and for the first time since he'd sat down across from her, Margaux Langford did not see a stranger who'd gotten tangled in her family's mess. She saw someone who had once believed in the same thing she did, before life had taken something from each of them and left them both standing in the wreckage of what they used to want. Neither of them said it out loud. Not yet. But something had shifted between them, and neither one knew yet how much it was about to cost. A total stranger just got caught on camera pretending to be 4 little girls' father, and within hours the internet had already picked a side. Team hero or team scandal? Drop your vote before segment 3. 2 weeks can undo a great deal if the right person is determined to unwind it. Patrick Crow formally introduced the merger proposal to the full board on a rain-gray Tuesday morning, a partnership with one of the largest luxury hospitality groups on the West Coast, the kind of deal that made stock analysts sit up straighter in their chairs. Buried in the fine print, quiet as a held breath, was the real condition every Langford resort built for middle-class families. The very heart the company had been founded on 40 years earlier would be sold off or shuttered within 18 months. Margaux fought it in every meeting she could reach. But something had shifted in the room since the photograph, and she could feel it. The way you feel a draft under a door before you ever find the crack. Board members who once nodded along to her quarterly reports now exchanged glances when she spoke. The scandal of the mystery man kept resurfacing, dressed up each time as concern rather than gossip. Is our CEO's judgment what it used to be? Can we trust someone this distracted with the largest deal of the decade? She had built Langford Family Resorts on the idea that a company could be profitable and still remember whose hands built it. Now that idea was being used against her, one whispered question at a time. Then Patrick went further than anyone expected, and this time he aimed straight at Alexander. He had a researcher pull Alexander's professional history, every contract, every reference, every gap, and he did not have to dig deep to find what he wanted. 5 years earlier, in the middle of a major commercial project, Alexander Hale had walked away without warning. The client had lost millions reworking the design under a new team. It had never made headlines at the time. Patrick made sure it made headlines now. The man who walked away is this, who Margaux Langford trusts around her children. The story ran across 3 industry outlets by lunchtime. Alexander's phone, usually quiet, would not stop buzzing that afternoon. 3 long-standing consulting clients pausing contracts pending review, a 4th simply going silent, the way people do when they've decided something about you without asking. Liam came home from school with his backpack straps twisted the wrong way, the way they always were when something had gone wrong at recess. He didn't say anything for the whole walk up the driveway. It wasn't until dinner over macaroni that had gone slightly cold because neither of them had felt much like eating that he finally asked in the smallest voice Alexander had heard from him in a long time. "Dad, is it true you quit a job and it cost people a lot of money?" Alexander set down his fork. He thought about every version of the answer he could give an 8-year-old and settled as he usually did on the truest one he could manage. "It cost the company money," he said. "It didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to give up." Liam nodded slowly the way kids do when they've decided to believe you but aren't quite finished thinking about it. What Alexander still hadn't told his son, what he'd never told anyone outside a hospital room, was the whole truth of that year. Margaux was about to become the first person to hear it. She found him 2 days later at the small park 3 blocks from his house, the one with the crooked slide and the swing set that squeaked no matter how much anyone oiled it. The kind of ordinary park that exists in every neighborhood in America. The kind you don't think twice about until suddenly it matters more than any boardroom you've ever sat in. She didn't sit down right away. She stood at the edge of the gravel with her hands in her coat pockets, watching him watch his son, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost the edge it usually carried, like armor. "Why did you leave that project?" Alexander was quiet for a long time, long enough that Margaux almost thought he wouldn't answer at all. "My wife was diagnosed," he said finally, eyes still on Liam. "The doctors gave her a few months. I chose to be home for them. I let people call me a quitter. I let the story stand because the truth felt like something I didn't owe anyone but her." He had never corrected the record, not once in 5 years, because defending himself would have meant turning his wife's dying into a press release proof of his own goodness, dressed up as an excuse. His deepest fear was never professional ruin. It was that Liam would grow up believing a father's love had to be justified to strangers before it counted. What he wanted sitting on that bench was simply to be believed by one person who mattered, and something in Margaux's stillness told him for the first time in 5 years that he finally had been. Margaux sat down on the bench beside him slowly, the way you sit down when your legs have decided the conversation is bigger than you expected. For the first time, she understood that what the industry had filed away as professional failure had actually been the bravest decision a man could make, choosing a dying wife over a deadline and living with the world's judgment ever since without ever once explaining himself. She did not know what to say to that. So for a while, she said nothing at all and just watched. Because on the other side of the playground, something was happening that neither of them had orchestrated. The 4 girls had found Liam by the swings, and whatever wall exists between children who've just met had come down faster than either parent could track. The girl with the mole was teaching Liam a new way to tie his shoelaces, the double loop trick her grandmother had shown her. The 2 who moved like they were always racing each other were shoving one another good-naturedly off the swings, shrieking with the particular joy that only comes from winning an argument that doesn't matter. And the quiet one, The one who chewed her lip and noticed everything simply came and sat beside Alexander on the bench, leaned her small shoulder against his arm, and said nothing at all for almost a full minute. Margaux watched from a few feet away, and something in her chest cracked open in a way it hadn't in longer than she wanted to admit. She realized, sitting there, that she could not remember the last time she had seen her daughters simply be children. Not posed for a photograph, not managing a room full of adults twice their size, just laughing, because a swing set is funny when you're 7, and the sun is out, and nobody is watching. Someone else was watching too, and this time it would cost them both far more than a headline. Patrick had followed her that afternoon quietly, the way men like him always seem to know exactly where to be. From his car across the street, he took several photographs. Margaux on a park bench, gaze soft, watching her children with a stranger and his son. And by that evening, every board member had received them in an email, with a single line of caption beneath. Our CEO appears to have let her personal life take full control. Can we trust her judgment on the largest merger of the decade? The stakes had stopped being simple the moment that photograph left Patrick's phone. It wasn't only Margaux's company on the line now. Alexander stood to lose the last of his consulting work, the reputation he'd spent 5 careful years rebuilding, and worse, far worse, the way the world would look at him, as a father. The girls, meanwhile, were being pulled deeper into a storm they were far too young to understand. 4 small faces now recognized on sight by strangers with phones. As the light went gold and long across the gravel that evening, Margaux turned to Alexander, her voice rough in a way it had never been in any boardroom. You already paid an enormous price once for choosing family over everything else, she said. Are you sure you're ready to pay it again? Alexander looked at Liam, laughing now, with 4 girls he'd known for exactly 2 weeks, looking freer than he had in longer than either of them could count. He didn't answer right away. But 2 mornings later, he called her office and asked for exactly one thing: the merger file every page, including the parts the press hadn't seen. If the board intended to drag him into this fight, regardless of what he chose, he wanted to walk into it prepared rather than accused. Margaux sent the file within the hour. Attached to it was a short, formal letter naming him an outside consultant on the resort's community impact thin cover, but enough barely to earn him a seat at the table when the shareholders convened 3 days later. Whatever he found in those pages would decide everything that happened at that hearing. 3 days later, the shareholder vote was held in the largest hall at Langford's downtown Seattle headquarters, glass walls looking out over Elliott Bay. More than 200 shareholders, board members, and reporters filling seats that had been added twice that week to keep up with demand. Patrick Crow stood first. He did not need to raise his voice. Men like him never do, because they've already arranged for the room to lean in. He clicked to a slide Alexander at the tea room table, surrounded by 4 girls, sugar spilled and forgotten beside the old headline about a man who'd walked off a job and cost a company millions. A CEO whose personal life has clearly spun out of control, he said, letting the silence do the rest of the work. Are we prepared to hand this company's future to that kind of instability? The room went heavy, the particular heaviness of 200 people deciding almost all at once to believe the worst. Margaux sat in the front row with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. She had rehearsed a dozen answers on the drive over, the way she used to rehearse hymns before a church solo as a girl, and every single one of them had evaporated the moment Patrick's slide filled the wall behind him. Somewhere in the 4th row, a reporter's pen scratched fast against a notepad. Somewhere closer, a board member she had once trusted with her father's old office would not meet her eyes. Then Patrick played the card he'd been saving, and for a moment it looked like it would be enough to end everything. He showed photographs of Margaux on the park bench, soft-eyed, watching her children play with a stranger's son. Is this, he asked, letting each word land like a stone, the picture of a leader in control? Margaux rose to answer him, but before she could speak, Alexander, invited that day only in his professional capacity as a public space design consultant, asked for the floor. He did not defend himself. He did not mention the tea room or the park or a single thing about his own life. He opened a folder instead, and the numbers he read into the microphone landed harder than any accusation Patrick had made all morning. The merger as structured would close 6 family resorts within 18 months. It would cost nearly 2,000 local jobs. It would eliminate every children's community program Langford had built its name on over 20 years. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through wheat. Alexander's voice did not rise. It didn't need to. He had spent enough years on job sites to know that a steady voice carries further than a loud one, especially in a room full of people already braced for a fight. He spoke about the resort outside Bend, Oregon, the one that never got built. The shaded courtyards, the low benches sized for grandparents and toddlers alike, the design the board had once called not upscale enough. He did not mention that Margaux had been the one to reject it. He only said that a company forgets its own soul, one small cancellation at a time, and that this merger would cancel the whole thing at once. And then he turned to the second half of his folder, the part that would change everything in the room. Buried in publicly filed SEC trading disclosures, the kind anyone can request if they know where to look and have a friend in finance willing to spend a week looking, was proof that Patrick and the shareholders aligned with him had purchased stock in the partner conglomerate before the merger had ever been proposed to the board. Insider trading. Not an accusation, a paper trail. For a long moment, nobody in that glass-walled room said anything at all. That was the moment a security guard who'd known the family for years quietly let a small figure slip past the velvet rope near the front of the hall. The girl with the mole beneath her eye crossed the open floor alone, in front of 200 strangers, and climbed the 2 steps to where her mother stood at the podium. She placed a piece of paper in Margaux's hand. Crayon hurried, the kind of drawing that only makes sense to the person it was made for. 4 small figures, and 1 tall one standing beneath a crooked tree. Beneath it, in careful 7-year-old letters, a CEO protects the company. A mom protects her kids. You can do both. Margaux read it twice. She folded it along its worn crease and slid it into the inside pocket of her blazer over her heart, the way you'd tuck away something you intended to keep for the rest of your life. For years, Margaux had believed leadership meant choosing company or children, armor or softness, never both at once, because that was the only kind of strength anyone had ever modeled for her in a boardroom. Her daughter's crayon drawing didn't teach her anything she didn't already know deep down. It simply gave her permission to stop performing a choice she'd never actually needed to make. The fear underneath her polished composure had never really been failure. It had been the quiet terror of becoming a mother her own children would one day have to forgive. Then she stepped back to the microphone. Her voice did not shake. I'm rejecting this merger. The room erupted into motion, reporters typing, board members leaning toward one another, Patrick's face gone very still and very cold. The chairman called for an emergency vote before anyone could leave the room, and the tally, when it came back, was close enough to make Margaux's stomach drop through the floor. She lost. And what happened in the next hour hurt worse than anyone in that room could have predicted. The board voted to remove her temporarily, to protect the company's image during the transition period. The fallout arrived within the hour, fast the way bad news always seems to travel, faster than good. 3 of Alexander's largest remaining clients emailed to cancel his consulting contracts that same afternoon, all using nearly identical language about reputational concerns. An industry blog ran the headline before the shareholder meeting had even fully adjourned, "The Architect Who Chose the Wrong Side." Liam was waiting on the front steps when Alexander got home that evening, backpack already off, sneakers untied. He didn't ask about the meeting. He asked something smaller, something that landed heavier. "Dad, are we going to have to move again?" Alexander sat down on the step beside his son and did not have an answer ready, which had almost never happened to him in 8 years of fatherhood. He put an arm around Liam's shoulders instead, the way he used to when the boy was small enough to fall asleep against him on car rides, and for a while, neither of them said anything more. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, the same stubborn bulb he kept meaning to replace and never did. Back at the glass-walled hall, the crowd had mostly filtered out, leaving only the particular silence rooms carry after something important has broken inside them. Margaux stood near the podium, blazer still buttoned, the folded drawing still tucked against her heart. A few yards away, Alexander stood with his folder now closed and useless in his hand. Both of them had just lost the thing they'd been fighting hardest to protect. In the hallway outside, 4 small faces waited in a row of chairs too big for them. The girl with the mole held the memory of her drawing she'd made 2 years, one for the podium and one folded in her own pocket just in case, and she did not cry. She only looked at her mother through the glass with an expression far too old for 7, an expression that seemed to say without a single word, "I'm sorry. I only wanted you to remember. You could do both." Everything the two of them had built, believed in, and fought for now hung by a single thread, and neither of them knew yet who, if anyone, was still holding the other end. 3 days after the vote, something began moving inside the company that no boardroom could have engineered. It started small. A housekeeping supervisor at the Cascade Lodge posting a single paragraph online about the man who had refused to hand 4 little girls over to a stranger in a hotel tea room simply because it was the right thing to do. Within hours, employees from a dozen Langford properties had added their own versions of the same story, the way water finds every crack in a dam once the first one gives. A groundskeeper in Sedona wrote about the scholarship program for staff children that Margaux had quietly funded out of her own bonus 3 years running. A front desk clerk in Charleston remembered the week Margaux herself had covered a shift so a single mother on her team could make her son's kindergarten graduation. None of it was new information. It had simply never been anyone's business to say out loud before. Someone, an administrative assistant, who happened to be walking past Margaux's office late one evening and saw her sitting with her head bowed over her desk, that folded crayon drawing spread open in front of her, asked gently if she could share it. Margaux said yes. She wasn't entirely sure why, except that hiding it had started to feel like the wrong kind of strength. A CEO protects the company. A mom protects her kids. You can do both. And once those words were out in the world, there was no putting them back. The drawing spread the way almost nothing spreads anymore. Not manufactured, not managed, just true. Small shareholders who'd never once spoken up in a proxy meeting began asking pointed questions. A handful of ESG-focused investment funds, the kind that read fine print for a living, requested a formal review of the stock purchases Alexander had flagged. It did not take long once the right people started looking. Within 72 hours, the trading records Patrick had hoped would stay buried in a folder no one opened were laid out fully in the light. He resigned from every board seat he held before the company could formally remove him, the kind of resignation that fools no one, least of all the people reading about it over their morning coffee. An emergency session was called. This time, the vote did not stay close for long. Margaux Langford was reinstated as CEO with a stronger mandate than she'd held before the whole ordeal began, and a public commitment, her own words read into the record herself, to keep every family-focused resort exactly where it belonged, at the heart of the company her grandfather had built. But the woman who had just won back everything still had one thing left to make right. Alexander did not get a phone call or flowers or anything that might have made a good scene in a movie. What he got 2 days later was a short, careful email from Margaux, a thank you, and attached to it a fully transparent consulting contract for a new family space initiative across the entire Langford chain, every term visible to the board, nothing hidden this time from anyone. He read it twice at his kitchen table. Then he signed it and didn't say much else about it, not even to Liam, who only found out a week later when he noticed his father humming while he made pancakes on a Tuesday, which was not a pancake day. After that, the park 3 blocks from Alexander's house started seeing more regular company. Nobody scheduled it. The girl with the mole simply started texting Liam on her mother's old phone. "Bring in the ball this afternoon." And somehow, without either parent quite arranging it, 4 girls and 1 boy found their way to the same crooked slide most weekday afternoons the weather allowed. Margaux came sometimes. She sat on the far bench a few yards off coat collar up against the wind, watching without hovering. Alexander sat on his usual bench, too, close enough that eventually the distance between the 2 benches stopped meaning very much. Some afternoons she brought a thermos of coffee and 2 cups, without ever quite announcing that the second cup was for him. Some afternoons he brought an extra folding chair from his garage just in case. Neither of them called it anything. It didn't seem to need a name yet. One evening, while the 5 kids ran themselves breathless chasing a ball none of them seemed particularly interested in catching, Margaux asked him something in a voice gone soft at the edges. "Do you ever regret standing your ground that day at the tea room?" Alexander watched Liam teach the girl with the crooked smile how to keep her balance on the low balance beam by the swings, wobbling, laughing, trying again. "I regret the times I walked away too soon," he said finally. This wasn't one of them. Neither of them said what came next out loud, but something had quietly settled between the 2 benches, and it was only going to grow from here. A year to the day, Alexander sat again at the same corner table in the Fairmont Olympic tea room. The same steam curling gently up from a fresh cup of Earl Grey. Some things, it turns out, are worth keeping exactly the same. Margaux sat across from him, this time not in a boardroom blazer, but in a soft cream sweater, hair loose around her shoulders for once instead of pinned back like armor. The thin silver bracelet still circled her left wrist. She'd told him once it had been her grandmother's, the only Langford heirloom that had never once been up for negotiation. The company was different now, too, in the ways that mattered most. 6 family resorts that had once been marked for closure were instead in the middle of renovations, their new courtyards, built from a set of soft-curved, low-walled plans that looked remarkably familiar to anyone who had once seen a sketchbook page in a tea room. Margaux never had to explain to the board why she'd chosen that designer. By then, everyone already knew. At the next table, 5 children argued cheerfully over who got first pick of the chocolate cake. The girl with the mole was doing her best impression of a stern father's voice, which made Liam laugh so hard he nearly knocked over his water glass. The one with the lopsided smile grinned wider than ever. The quiet one tilted her head listening to the whole argument like it was the most fascinating court case she'd ever presided over. And leaning her small shoulder against Liam's arm, the one who used to chew her lip out of worry, did it now only out of habit. Because there was nothing left in this particular afternoon to be worried about. Margaux had one more question left in her, the one she'd been waiting a year to ask. She watched the children a long moment before she turned back to Alexander, her voice gentler than any tone she'd ever used across a boardroom table. "Do the girls still need you to pretend to be their father?" Alexander opened his mouth, but the girl with the mole had already turned around. Children he had noticed over the past year always seemed to know exactly when they were being talked about, and she answered for him without hesitation, with the particular certainty only a 7-year-old can carry. "No," she said. "We think he should choose for himself." A long quiet settled over the table. Not an uncomfortable one. The kind of quiet that only happens after something true has finally been said out loud. Alexander looked at his son, laughing at a table full of girls he'd known for exactly 1 year. He looked at the 4 of them, no longer strangers to him in any sense that mattered. And then he looked at Margaux. He lifted his teacup. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not feel the old, familiar urge to leave before anything had the chance to become real. Outside, the 5 children spilled out onto the small lawn beside the hotel, laughter rising bright and unrehearsed into the Seattle afternoon. Inside, 2 grown-ups sat together at a corner table, no longer needing to pretend anything at all. On Alexander's wrist, his late wife's old watch ticked on steady as ever. Only now, for the first time in 5 years, it wasn't counting anything down. This story reminds us that a father isn't made by blood or by a name on a birth certificate. He's made by the choice to stay in the room when a family needs someone steady. Alexander Hale never planned to matter to those 4 girls. He simply refused to look away, and that refusal changed the shape of several lives, including his own. Most of us will never get a moment as dramatic as a hotel tea room and 4 frightened children. But we get smaller versions of it almost every week if we're paying attention, and they ask just as much of us. If you're the one setting a single plate at your own table more nights than you'd like to admit, try this instead. This Thursday, before you turn on the evening news, call the neighbor 2 doors down, the one whose husband passed last spring, and ask her to bring her coffee over to your porch at 4 o'clock. Not for a project, not for a purpose, just so 2 cups sit on the same railing for 20 minutes. If there's a grandchild in your life who's going through something you can sense but can't quite name, don't wait for the big conversation. Text them one line tonight, thinking of you, no reason. Then let it sit. Half the time, that's the door that actually gets walked through. And the next time you notice a child who looks a little lost at the pharmacy, at the ball game, in the church parking lot, you don't need a plan and you don't need permission. You need 30 seconds and a steady voice, the same as Alexander had. That's the whole lesson, really. Not grand gestures, just showing up on time for the person right in front of you, the same way that porch light stays on for you every single night, whether or not anyone remembers to thank it. Every line comes from real human insight and lived experience. AI was used only to improve clarity and pacing, allowing deep, usable lessons about kindness, systemic bias, and personal strength within the family to resonate with a global audience.